Hi and welcome to Sydney's early built form. This wonderful built environment from the first fleet to the first financial crash of 1890. Thank you for showing your interest in this great time of our nation's growth. I'm selecting the 19th century because European history has had a short history. It had but a glimpse of the 18th century, and in the 19th century, dramatic events and people accelerated its young history to a much higher level. The 20th century that followed was leveraged off the base created in the 1900s. Now, this will be the first of the series of 19th century buildings. In future videos, I'll be looking forward to detailing each building. Then, subject to interest from you, I'll be doing a further series of more buildings. But we won't stop there. We'll need to know what tools the tradesmen wielded and how they got their bricks, their mortar and their steel onto their sites. Interesting stuff. I'm Michael Beashall, Australian historical fiction writer. Now, the intent of my writing is to celebrate the building industry in 19th century New South Wales and use it in the main as a context for my plots and my characters. Where possible, I've highlighted historic examples of major works and prominent people of note. Specialist historians and architects have written about this period in these videos. My slant is to try and make you feel about the emergence of the buildings themselves and what effect they had on the designers and contractors who built them and on the people these buildings enclosed. More importantly, you know, the architecture of the European period, the Renaissance and early to middle 20th century America, all these periods, great as they were, have been given due attention. However, the architects of colonial New South Wales, after Francis Greenway, of whom we'll talk a little later, and the contractors who executed their designs are often not given the credence they deserve. I really hope that these videos and ones like these will inform. I thank and acknowledge the State and National Libraries of Australia for the information, lithographs and prints you'll see. But let's just pause. Before getting into the individual buildings, of which there are many fine ones, I think a context is needed of just what society was like and how things came to be. Shelter is the third human need, and it is essential for civilization to survive and to thrive. Now, in genre fiction, the building industry has been used little as a context, although bestsellers like The Pillars of the Earth and The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand paint vivid stories and characters against the backdrop of monumental building construction. Now back to Sydney, and supporting the truism that shelter was mandatory. We all need it. We all live in houses. There are 5 periods of housing history which we can section into the primitive period, the age of Macquarie, the colonial period, early Victorian, gold rush if you like, mid or high Victorian. Now, in summary, the typology of housing mirrored the economic times and the growth of the colony. Now this, you would expect this. Cavemen lived in caves in primitive surroundings. Civilised people lived in buildings. Investment in housing varied across all periods, either from government or private money. Demand and supply of housing was also proportional to the population growth. The provision of housing was determined upon the labour required to build, and in the primitive period, the tools required to build them. There was no chicken and egg. Housing was built in the primitive and colonial periods, and infrastructure followed that, the railways and so forth. Seminal points in the history of New South Wales housing was the development and town planning which occurred in the Macquarie period, about 1820s to about 18. Yeah, and the gold rush and its effects and the growth of the railways. There was a response to context. There was little response of housing design to the climate of Australia in the early part of the colony. Rather, the built environment was an importation of European style architecture. And so, in the videos in the coming months, we'll look at the various iconic buildings that celebrated the periods in which they were built. We'll look at a whole range of buildings, the infrastructure, the lighthouses, the community buildings and town halls. We will see the fine homes of the gentry, the music halls and the places of entertainment and the hotels. We will look at the institutional buildings and those housing the government, which was a big part of the early part of the colony. Some of those gained international recognition, these buildings at the time, for being wonderful examples of built architecture within the far-flung elements of the empire. So, keep an eye out for these, and thank you for your interest in this.